What's up guys, Noah from Stage 3 Motorsports here, and today I'm going to be bringing you a review on the Bilstein 5100 suspension system for the Toyota 4Runner, and more specifically the Toyota 4Runner that's the 5th generation. Now, with this suspension, I do want to get a disclaimer out of the way because obviously with most of our vehicles, they're company-owned project vehicles that we build, and then I drive them and test them for a certain amount of time out in the field as we add things and build them. Now with this 4Runner, it's actually my own personal vehicle. So obviously there's probably some bias there to the suspension and that I chose it for a reason, and I needed something that fit a build for a vehicle that works for what I do. So I am going to be speaking from a little bit more of a personal perspective this time than I normally would. So with that out of the way, first things first, let's talk about what this kit actually is and kind of what the specs are on it. The Bilstein 5100 kit consists of 2 front shocks and 2 rear shocks in the full system, or you can buy them separately or just do fronts. Now, the fronts are a leveled strut, so they have some adjustability in there with a little C-clip that can be moved up and down when you're actually assembling it. And that allows you to go anywhere from 0 inches of lift, which would be just factory ride height, all the way up to 2.5 inches of lift if you wanted something a little bit more extreme. Then in the rear, you don't add any additional lift with these shocks, but they do have the ability to stretch a little further and a little bit more travel if you do add some lift in the form of a taller spring or a spring spacer in the back. And on this truck specifically, we have a 1-inch spring spacer in the back, and then at the front we have it set to 1.75 inches, so it gets a pretty leveled stance. There's technically a little tiny bit of rake, which I don't mind because I usually have some amount of weight in the back of the vehicle in the form of coolers or off-road equipment or camping gear. So this keeps a really nice stance for all the time driving, and I don't ever end up with a weird nosed up in the air sort of look. Now, on a kit like this with, an additional 1.75 inches of leveling, you do have the ability to run a larger tire. And so I've got some 285/70/17 Falcon Wild Peaks on here. It's a really good little all-terrain that is larger than factory, runs out to about a 32.7-inch tire, and with just a little bit of plastic trimming within the fenders, I can get it to clear with very, very minimal rubbing. I usually only get rub if I'm trying to turn full lock and I'm articulating down a hill or something like that. But in day-to-day driving, it almost never catches, so that has worked out exceptionally well for me, and I like the look, the fitment, and the feel for this truck. It really checks all the boxes to give me something that is actually daily drivable, since I use this to get to work and also get out on trails and go camping. Now, these shocks are pretty simple, and the Bilstein 5100 system is not meant to be anything crazy, so this doesn't compete in the same realm as, say, like a Fox 2.5 or an Icon 2.5 kit, or any of the really crazy Raptor 3.0 suspensions. That stuff is in a totally different league than this is. This is a much more entry-level, affordable, simple kit that's going to get you out in the dirt, and it basically uses those steel body monotube shocks that are pretty much the same size as the factory shocks. There maybe is a little bit more fluid capacity in there, but they're just a bit more durable. They have some better valving, and they're made to hold up to off-road abuse a little bit better than your out-of-the-box Toyota shock is probably prepped to do. Talking in terms of actual off-road performance now, I think the Bilstein kit does a really good job, especially for being more in the budget end of the price range and managing a lot of the regular off-roading that people will do with a daily driving kind of vehicle. So if you're out hitting, just regular forest service roads or desert simple trails like this, where it's very 2-wheel drive, just kind of rocky or washboarded out, they are much better at handling those corrugations and handling the kind of bumps and jittering that comes with that. You're going to have a lot less issue with shock fade. Obviously, being able to run a larger tire gives you that ability to air down, and that's going to correct for some of that jittering and shaking as well. As you progress into trails that are actually more 4-wheel drive oriented, and you need to get into areas where it's a bit more technical and you're not just going to cruise in there with a station wagon, that's where the Bilsteins really start to help out, because you do have that little bit of additional lift. You can get that bigger tire in there, kind of work with a little bit more travel. The truck has more room to move. You're going to be able to get more traction, and it's going to give you that advantage to squeeze into areas where not everybody's going to be able to get to. And with this truck, I felt like it's done an exceptionally good job of that. It really rides pretty comfortably, especially when you're aired down on the really, really rocky technical terrain. You're not as much concerned about suspension performance in those situations, just because you're not going fast enough to necessarily warrant it, but you do want something that can control the body roll and manage the weight of the vehicle, and the Bilsteins tend to do a good job of that. I didn't feel like the 4Runner's factory suspension was overly soft like the Ranger's was when we got it, but it was definitely pretty squishy, and like I said, as you add weight into the vehicle with other people or camping gear and things like that, it does cause it to buck around more, and it's harder to modulate your braking and manage that vehicle's weight. So with the Bilsteins being just a touch more firm, it definitely helps you control the vehicle more and keep it settled in as you move down more technical obstacles or are crawling up more technical obstacles. So that's something I do really like about this system. Now, I do want to note here as I'm talking about it, obviously right now where I'm driving and talking to you is simple two-wheel drive gravel road. This is nothing crazy, but I have had the chance to put over 10,000 miles on the suspension now, and I've been to California, all over Arizona, into Colorado, parts of Utah. And so in some of those areas, especially like Colorado, I've been able to take this setup with these Bilsteins, these tires, nothing else crazy, and hit things like Black Bear Pass or Imogene, where it gets extremely technical and is probably maybe outreaching what this kit should be doing, but it's still stepped up to the plate and it's performed the way I've needed it to. So I feel like you can actually push this kit to its limits a little bit more so than you could some of the other systems on the market. And it's certainly going to be a lot safer and a lot better performing than any spacer kit. And I typically just wouldn't recommend a leveling spacer anyways, but I think with the Bilstein, it's a really hard sell to want to even go to a cheaper spacer just because the performance gain is so much better here. Now, with all the good I've had to say about the Bilstein kit, obviously it's a little bit hard to find fault with it, and I think it does everything that I need perfectly. Now, the first area people may find an issue though, or I guess an area you can mark it as a con, is if you're looking for something that's going to be more capable in high speeds, you want to bomb across the desert, or you're somebody that's trying to do King of Hammers style driving. This kit is not going to be in that league. It's not designed for that. This is definitely more of a simple trail friendly kind of kit. And so if you're going for something that's going to run the Baja 1000, that's where you're going to want to move into 2.5s. You're going to want external resis. You're going to want stuff that has adjustable valving. And this kit just isn't built for that. Now, with that being said, if you are into trail driving, the next area you may run into an issue with the system is going to be that there's not a lot of upgradability around it. So some of the alternate kits, such as like the Eibach Pro Truck kit, give you the option to add a new coil spring in the front with the leveling strut. And what that can do is give you some better ways to accommodate additional weight with things like a steel bumper, a winch, a tent, just anything that's going to really weigh that front of the truck down or settle the whole vehicle can be accommodated a little bit better with a spring that's designed for it. And Bilstein doesn't really offer that with the 5100 system, which is kind of odd. So I wish that there was an option for that, but I will say that with a newer truck like this, and for most of the 5th gen 4Runners, the factory coil spring is going to be enough. But if you are running a very built overland setup or something where you've got a lot of equipment in the vehicle or you're carrying your full family with you all the time, then that spring may be enough to get you looking at some different kits. The last thing I would say counts as a con for this is there is eventually a limit to where these shocks are going to start to fade and you're going to lose a bit of that off-road performance. So when you're doing really long trail runs or you're hitting trails all day like I was doing in Colorado, or like sometimes I'll do on the weekends out here in Arizona, eventually you are going to get a lot of heat soaking in there, and so you're going to have to wait for that stuff to cool, or dial it back, or just kind of suffer the consequences of having a shock that's a smaller body and doesn't have as much fluid in there. It does reach that point. I feel like it still takes a while, and even once they are starting to fade, the performance isn't bad. But once again, it's something to consider, and if you're concerned about that or you want the best possible ride for the longest amount of time, then once again, you're going to be starting to look into some more expensive kits that are getting into full coilovers with resis and things like that are made to accommodate it. But it really just depends on what you do, and I think a lot of times you can get away with a simpler system than you may think you need, but that's for you guys to decide with the kind of driving that you do. Now that we're back at the shop, I usually like to wrap these leveled strut or coilover reviews just talking really quickly and briefly about how they perform on the street, because usually there's not a lot of change there in the feel. And for the Bilsteins, that's the case as well. These are still a really comfortable ride on the road. It feels very similar to factory. And if you're in that 1 inch to 1.5 inch range of lift, it's gonna be a little bit more stiff, but probably not enough for you to really discern. I noticed a little less body roll, and that was really the only change. I still think it's exceptionally comfortable, and the 4Runner is still very daily drivable with the suspension on there. Now, with that being said, if you do max these out or you try to add some sort of coil spring to it and really mess with what Bilsteins Bilstein's engineered, it's gonna ride worse. Any shock that you max out isn't gonna ride nice, so you can stiffen up the riding, you can kind of hinder the truck, but a lot of people probably aren't gonna be pushing the shocks to that kind of limit, so I don't think that that's really a major concern here. With all that being said, this is gonna be a wrap on our Bilstein review. I do appreciate you guys watching, and if you wanna find out some more details or take a look at the listings for these shocks, we'll have the links down in the description below so you can check that out, and it'll shoot you over to our website. And as always, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.